question.
Okay. Ella, when you're ready.
Sorry. J.D. Salinger's novel, The Catcher in the Rye, may, on the face of it, seem like it acquires unjustifiable praise for a seemingly tedious storyline, but the deeper emotions and inner turmoil experienced by adolescents investigated in the novel are highly relevant and still warrant further study by students today. Although I can assume the majority of us aren't riveted by Holden's journey, the fact is, with 65 million copies sold worldwide since its release in 1951, the praise of the book can be justified when one looks into the themes portrayed through Holden. This is due to the way in which Salinger delves into the transition from child to adult, relatable to teenagers in any time period. The adolescent voice portrayed by Salinger was a new occurrence in the 1950s, indicating that the novel's portrayal of the teen voice is possibly even more relevant to teenagers today, as the acknowledgement of the phase between child and adult has increased over time. Holden's search for identity is one that we are all subject to throughout life. Everyone experiences the same transition from a child to adult, and this search for identity leads to Holden facing the difficult aspects of the newly recognised phase of adolescence, leading to his avoidance of reality and in turn detaching himself in attempts to escape the expectations placed upon him. Through effective use of narrative features, Salinger was able to relevantly construct these themes of self-discovery and isolation. When we compare Holden's internal experiences as a teenager to ours, they are not as dissimilar as one would like to think. The Catcher in the Rye is still relevant to teenagers today due to the way in which Salinger delves into the inner turmoil experienced by youths transitioning from childhood to adulthood. Holden's struggle with coming to terms with this inevitable change can be seen through his attachment to the museum in New York, when he states, "In that museum, everything always stayed right where it was. Nobody'd move." The museum symbolises Holden's childhood, as it acts as a freeze frame he knows he can return to despite having grown up. This indicates he did not fit in the category of a child, but was also not mature enough to be labelled as an adult. Holden's struggle to accept his maturing can be seen through his need to protect the innocence of other children. "I'm standing on the edge of some crazy cliff. What I have to do, I have to catch everybody if they start to go over the cliff." This imagery of Holden's fantasy implies his innocence and his longing to protect the youth, but also shows his naivety in how the world actually works. The reality is, shown through, this desire to guard innocence is contrasted by Holden's attempts to acting older than he really is, shown through his smoking, buying alcoholic drinks, and paying for a prostitute. For example, in the lavender room at his hotel in New York, "I ordered a scotch and soda and told him not to mix it. I said it fast as hell because if you have a whore, they think you're under 21 and won't sell you intoxicating liquor." This sentence seems as though as it is directed to the reader specifically, with the use of "you," giving a sense that Holden has experience in this situation, offering his knowledgeable advice. These types of experiences are still prevalent in today's society, as the Australian Drug Foundation website states. Young Australians aged 14 to 24 have their full first set of alcohol at 15.7 years on average. Attempting to act older than your age is still a common thing today, as I'm sure we've all experienced. Portraying the fact that many adolescents still feel the social pressure to partake in actions such as alcohol consumption in an effort to be seen as more mature. Psychology professor Lee Parrott supports this by stating, "Teens often feel that appearing mature will bring recognition and acceptance. They begin engaging in practices they associate with adulthood, such as smoking, drinking, drugs, and sexual activity." Holden's personal attempts at acting more mature are contrasted by his bid to befriend children much younger than him. For example, I asked her if she'd care to have a hot chocolate or something for me, but she said no, thank you. She had to meet her friend. Holden's innocence is portrayed through this colloquial conversation between him and the girl, as he seems much more comfortable in this situation than he is with his fellow adolescents or adults. Through portraying Holden's constant struggle with building relationships with adolescents and adults, and his sense of not quite belonging within both worlds, Salinger furthers the notion of the transition that adolescents experience, making The Catcher in the Rye still highly relevant to students today. Furthering on Holden's fear of the transition between childhood and adulthood, he attempts to avoid the reality of the impending and unavoidable responsibilities he associates with adulthood. This is easily applicable to today, as no matter what time period you live in, there are always going to be situations where it seems easy to avoid rather than face reality. This escapism often leads to isolation in Holden's case, which in turn means he suffers from what seems like depression. We can easily correlate Holden's emotions with the experiences of teenagers today, as according to the Beyond Blue Youth website, 1 in 16 Australians is currently experiencing depression. Salinger portrays Holden as an individual who lies without reason, as seen in his trade rights to New York, when he is asked his name by the mother of a classmate. Rudolph Smith, I told her. I didn't feel like giving her my whole life story. This blatant and unnecessary lie clearly avoids any real connection, contradicting his dislike of phonies, as he is himself often phony by avoiding truth and responsibilities. Another example of Holden's escapism is through his interest in where the ducks in the lake in Central Park go in the winter, as the ducks symbolise Holden's concern that he himself may one day disappear, or be forgotten, like the ducks every winter. Holden visits the lake, noticing it was partly frozen and partly not frozen. The pond, being halfway between two states, symbolises Holden's transition from child to adult. This feeling of being in between or not belonging is something that transcends time, as a youth survey conducted by Gallup shows 17% of adolescents felt as though they don't belong, which correlated to their lower achievements in school. This can be linked to Holden's personal situation, as he also did not achieve well in school and was not satisfied with his position within society. Due to these themes being explored by Salinger transcending time, it indicates that the Catcher in the Rye is still able to be studied today, as although Holden's situation is somewhat dated, the underlying emotional experiences are not as different as one would think. Salinger is able to accurately portray the voice of adolescence through the realistic depiction of the emotions of Holden and through effective use of narrative features. This teen voice is something once ignored, but is now very prevalent in today's society. Because of this increase in acknowledgement of the transition between child and adult, one could argue that the Catcher in the Rye is more relevant to us today. Though many of us, Holden included, may not realise it, there are always going to be things we internalise and attempt to completely ignore. Although we may not have things such as being expelled from our fourth school to hide from our parents, there are some things we may choose not to share with the world, just as Holden did. This avoidance of reality, especially the reality of growing up, is something that transcends time, making Catcher still applicable to our lives. Salinger's novel had lasted the test of time, and it is definitely able to be studied by students today due to the easily relatable representation of teenagers and their experiences in the transition into adulthood.